afternoon. I'm Jen Price. I work at Calvert Social Investment Foundation, and it's a real pleasure to be here today with Will Towns, who leads Benefit Chicago. He's the executive director of Benefit Chicago. Benefit Chicago is a collaboration that aims to mobilize $100 million for impact investments for nonprofits and social enterprises working throughout the Chicago region. And next to him is Shalini Vagela, who is the founder and CEO of Refocus Partners, a design firm launched in 2012 that creates new resilient infrastructure solutions and private-public partnerships. So we're here with this panel practitioners, in fact, which I find very exciting, to really illuminate. You'll hear from them the challenges, the opportunities, and I hope, like the theme of today, also inspire perhaps some of the work that's being done to advance really the human and the hard infrastructure build to create resilient cities. And in the theme of, I've been a practitioner in this field now 15 years, and I was thinking how much we all like debating definitions, impact investing, community investing, ESG. I thought maybe we could spend some time debating the definition of resilience, and I thought, let's not. That it would be best if I just put out a definition so we all had something to hold on to, because I do think resilience is a word that can mean different things to different people. And so one that I thought was a good one to hold on to came through the work of Rockefeller Foundation and in their recent report, Catalyzing the Urban Resilience Market. It's a January 2017 publication. And resilience is the ability of a city to survive, adapt, and grow, no matter what kinds of chronic stresses and acute shocks they experience. Resilience requires cities to take transformative actions that make cities better in both short and long term, and allow cities to not only endure but thrive in both good times and bad. So as I mentioned before, we'll hear from our practitioners some of the challenges that they've experienced in their work, but we'll also, through that conversation, web through some of the macroeconomic challenges that we all know cities are facing. Extreme weather, growing populations. So we're really building today's infrastructure for a much bigger tomorrow. Some statistics is by 2050, 70% of the world's populations will be living in urban centers. And then, of course, the increasing reality that government budgets are declining, if not shrinking, to fund a lot of this work. And also, kind of in the theme of the day, hopefulness. One of the things I think is so brilliant about this panel is these are practitioners that are going to share projects that are happening. And with that, I think they offer great demonstration and inspiration for others of how we can overcome not only these macroeconomic challenges, but some of the day-to-day realities that we face in creating these financial innovations of moving this work forward. So with that, Shalini, can we start with you? The work of Refocus Partners is broad, but there's one piece that I want to hone in on first, and that's your work on resiliency bonds. Mm-hmm. And if you could just share with the audience what these bonds are at a very basic level, what they're seeking to do, and what the opportunity they afford.
Great. Thanks, Jen. Good afternoon, everyone. I'm going to ask the AV team in the corner to just pop up a slide to anchor you all to what we're talking about when I talk about resilience bonds. So while those images come up, how many of you recognize some of the pictures on the screen here? Okay, a few hands. So in the top corner, the one that might be the most familiar, is a picture of the New York subway system after Hurricane Sandy. The other three images that look awfully similar are a water main break in downtown LA on Sunset Boulevard that flooded UCLA's campus. My team and I work with cities around the world on redesigning infrastructure. And very often we never define resilience because we start with a very simple question of, where are you losing money today? And every city can answer that question. They can tell you exactly where they don't have enough money for what they need, where things are getting more expensive than they can afford in the next few years. And that's a great starting point for the conversation about resilience bonds. So what we've been doing for the last several years, after we're a renegade team of former public officials who came together to build public-private partnerships because when we left government, we weren't given a choice by a number of partners that we worked with. So I may be the very odd entrepreneur that started a company to stay in public service. And the work we do is to save cities from stuff like this. So we redesign water systems, energy systems, transportation systems, and often we glue these systems together to be able to create multiple benefits and attract private finance. So the images up here are a perfect example of where cities are hemorrhaging money right now and pulling money out of things like funds for school lunches, for foster care. It's a zero-sum game. And the smaller the city, the harder the game. So resilience bonds are a mechanism that my team and I designed in collaboration with Goldman Sachs, Swiss Re, and RMS, a catastrophe modeling firm in London, where what we did, we realized we were designing infrastructure projects to fix problems like this. And in the process, we were creating insurance benefits. But every time we went to a retail insurer, the answer we got is, oh, that's wonderful. Yes, you'll see a decrease on the increase in premiums. They won't go up as fast. Well, that's unhelpful. And in places like Miami Beach, where premiums are rising by 200% a year for some properties, it's a drop in the bucket for homeowners, for commercial properties. So what we started doing was looking at the reinsurance market, and we landed on catastrophe bonds because we were designing things like seawalls around Norfolk or Miami Beach or San Francisco. And when you build a seawall to protect a community, or when you put in a mangrove, or when you put in any sort of coastal protection, you measurably reduce risk behind that wall. If you haven't done that, you've built your wall badly. So anyone who cannot find a risk reduction has their engineering wrong. So what we did is we worked on a theory for the last year in 2015 to test whether we could actually reshape catastrophe bonds in a way that captured the savings from a resilient infrastructure project. So I want you all to have an analogy in your head as I talk through this, because I'm going to verbally describe a financial mechanism, which is always ill-advised. So I want you to think about a life insurance policy. When you quit smoking, your rates go down. There are data in place to make that happen. When a city builds a seawall, it's a lot like quitting smoking. But there's no equivalent. A catastrophe bond, how many of you are familiar with cat bonds and how they work? Okay, some of the room. Cat bonds are 3 to 5 year insurance policies. Their bond is a misnomer. They're not muni bonds, and we have to clarify that all the time with cities. They are insurance contracts between large asset holders and issuers, and they go out to market for 3 to 5 year terms. They're attractive because they're not correlated, really, with any other market instrument. And the beauty of a cat bond is that it is designed to do something called trigger in the event of a disaster, a predetermined disaster. So if a hurricane hits you, that bond pays out the same way a life insurance policy would. The thing that sucks about life insurance and cat bonds is you have to die to get the money. This is never what cities want to do. So what we started looking at was, how do you combine insurance with project finance? Both very plain vanilla things that are well understood. They just aren't glued together. So could you build a seawall, and in the construction of your seawall, reset your cat bond so that you capture the difference in risk and redirect it to the project? So think about that a lot like, I quit smoking, I'm saving money, and now I'm redirecting that back to health investments, my gym membership, right? So this should be a virtuous cycle of risk reduction. So in 2015, we worked with all these partners, Goldman, Swiss Re, and RMS, and we actually validated this mechanism. So it is market vetted, and we've been in the process of working with several cities on large infrastructure projects and with utilities to actually implement these resilience bonds. All of you in the social impact space, I never have to explain how long this takes. I think we're about 18 months from the first issuance, and we think about this like a nuclear power plant. We cannot get the first one wrong, or there will never be a second one. So we are very methodically working our way through project design and project finance, and then moving on structuring and design. But that's the nuts and bolts of a resilience bond.
That's excellent. And just one you kind of threw it out throughout, but why does it matter for cities at a really kind of top level?
Yeah, so one of the things that's not well understood in cities is waiting for a disaster to happen to get money is rarely a good idea, because think about Hurricane Sandy. Some cities still have not received the federal funds after that disaster. Cities are waking up to the need for rapid response money because they're recognizing that you lose money when you let water sit in a city. And you lose more than the disaster cost you. So there's a wake-up call that's happening in some of the larger cities about needing better insurance, but there's also a lot of activity now about replacing failing infrastructure. And so the time is really ripe to replace failing assets with something that's creating losses, with something that will actually measurably create savings and capture that really enormous leap. So the time is really right.
Excellent. And Will, likewise, could you share with us the innovative collaboration that created Benefit Chicago and the needs it's meeting within the city?
Sure, Jen. And thank you again. Thanks, everyone, for inviting me here today. I think I, too, will turn to the IT team to run a small video, and then I'll add some comment after that. But I think the video will give us a gist of what we're trying to attempt with Benefit Chicago.
Hot, I'm hot, hot, hot. Show me the kitchen, turn me loose, let me at it. I wanna cook now.
Arnold is just an all-star. I know he calls it a miracle sometimes, but it's a miracle that happens here every day. People going through this training program to really change their lives.
We live in Chicago. We see the need here. There are organizations at work every day in every community, working hard heroically.
Looking back at my record, who's ever gonna trust me? I just had so many strikes against me. Inspiration Kitchen did.
You proud of me?
And I am so just thankful for this place.
Benefit Chicago unleashes a different type of philanthropic capital, a capital that does have some type of return.
Private investors, businesses, institutions, everyone can buy a note. That money will then be invested in nonprofits and social entrepreneurs throughout the city.
At the end of the day, social sector organizations are businesses. They have the same need for capital that any organization in the marketplace does. Second Federal Savings and Loan was a 150-year-old institution serving Latino and immigrant communities in Chicago. In the midst of the financial crisis, the FDIC shut them down.
They were going to foreclose. We were afraid of losing the house by that.
A large loan to Self-Help Credit Union made it possible to sustain this banking asset in that community.
Since 2013, we've been able to house 600 new families and homes. 0% delinquency in those 600 families. We would not be able to do that if it wasn't for access to capital.
This new resource is capital that's going to be patient, flexible, and really meet the needs of nonprofits.
So that's 2 so far.
Chicago is a place where we have an enduring commitment to the vitality and the welfare of its residents.
Benefit Chicago is an incredible innovation in philanthropy.
This is a unique and first-time opportunity to invest your capital in Chicago. Everyone can be part of this movement.
I think this is where I'm supposed to drop the mic and exit the stage and let the video do the speaking. But no, I think there's a couple things I want to highlight from the video that you've seen just to bring to attention. One, Benefit Chicago really is a unique collaboration where 3 organizations, foundations are coming together, each bringing their separate expertise that creates a mechanism where the 1 + 1 + 1 is 4. That we're getting more input and impact as a collaboration than we could as individual organizations. And by that, we'll start with the Trust, with its long history of really investing and giving grants in the local community, sort of really understanding on the ground what's really happening in the community. Combining that with MacArthur's long history of impact investing and their expertise in sort of underwriting these organizations in a way that allows organizations that traditionally couldn't receive traditional financing to be eligible to really take the money and sort of push forward. And then the magic that sort of brings all of this together really is the Calvert Note, that now, for an example, communities and individuals can contribute towards the change and impact in their community in a very simple and easy way. No longer are we waiting and hope for an Olympics to come to our community to sort of have big impact and change, or communities fighting over a presidential library and which neighborhood it should go in to receive the impact. That in fact now, the hand that we're looking for may potentially be at the end of our own arm, that we can reach into our pockets with as little as $20 or 20 million or 20,000 and really have it go back into our local communities. And that is something that I think is incredibly powerful. When I think about how a family who's contributed some dollars, a son with his mom or dad walking past a Benefit Chicago investment, and the pride that they can get to know that they've contributed towards this change in their community, that they have a sort of a stake in the game and the change that's happening is something that's incredibly powerful. And the notion that Benefit Chicago is taking the capital and creating a mechanism that is not only patient and risk tolerant, but flexible. And this ability to sort of really change the algorithms that's being used to underwrite investments in our community. From the video, you didn't see a lot of businesses, right? You saw people. And that's really what our investment is about. It's about the investment in the belief that in all of our communities there is brilliance and there is capacity, but it's stuck in a stagnant state because of the lack of flow of capital into these neighborhoods. And so the collaboration is really based on that simple premise, that research shows that we have neighborhoods in our communities that are stuck in a state of disinvestment due to lack of capital inflows. And we have a second piece of the research that shows that individuals are looking for a closer tie to their investments, that no longer are they content with investing in Apple or some of these large corporations and watching people camp out overnight in the rain to get an iPhone X, whatever number it is, but really want to have a closer tie to the change in things that they're doing. And this change is allowing them to do that. The bridge that was broken prior to Benefit Chicago was this notion of how could they find out these opportunities? How could they assess risk? How could they make a determination on what organization that they could put their money into? And Benefit Chicago acts as that conduit or that bridge that allows this local capital to flow to have local impact. And so we're really excited about that. And it's really a simple premise that's long overdue.
Thank you. And as you can see, I know a little bit about this innovation. Will and I have been working on this. It's been just great with other partners, as you saw. But my question, Will, is really, I've seen, is that it's inspired other cities to also think about how do we create some type of collaboration? How do we unlock new sources of capital, like you mentioned, private capital potentially? How do we feed the needs that we know are unmet in our city? And when you get these questions for other cities, how do you say, or how do you guide them on the first step or where to start in exploring creating something similar to a Benefit Chicago?
Yeah, I think it's a very interesting question because we get a lot of emails and phone calls about how did we do it? What's the secret? And as of today, we're on the verge of making our first announcements and our first set of investments, and so we're very proud of the team and the diligence process we've put in place to make that announcement. But as of today, we have no investments. But everyone wants to know kind of how did we do it? I think the first thing in talking with these organizations, I think it's important, like our capital is patient, the organizations also need to have patience. These things take an incredible amount of time to put together if you want to do it well. Again, I think like your example, the first time out has to be pristine because the second time you don't really get a chance. And so it is really sort of understanding what your markets are, looking for where collaborators can come to the table, and then also really understanding where the brilliance is within the communities, right? This is not us at a table sort of determining what needs to happen in these neighborhoods, but it's really having an open and honest dialogue with these organizations to understand not only they need capital, what type of capital, how could the capital be structured, how can it flow in easy to allow them to go in, what other collaborators can we bring to the table to allow these transactions to really sort of take fruition in the communities. And it is this patient sort of process that I think is important. I think more than anything, we may not be building a model for how to do this, but we have a very strong theory on how this can work, from which different cities and sizes can build their model off of. And I think that that's incredibly important. When we go to some smaller towns and they say, oh, you've raised $100 million, there's no way we could do this, could we really have an impact or not? And the answer is absolutely. Each town, each community has its own sort of mechanisms and things that are needed, and in some cases, a smaller $25,000, $100,000 loans can make a huge impact and difference in the change that's happening. And so this is a very, I think, customizable approach to allow varying organizations of varying sizes to really sort of come together in a way that makes it possible for them to also have impact.
Excellent. Thank you. And similarly, scaling the bonds. Yeah. But before we get to that, wanted to understand a little bit for the audience about the impact piece. And, you know, as I heard you describe this bond, I have to imagine building a seawall in Miami is different than building a seawall in Norfolk, in the sense of the savings that are going to be, you know, quantified from that investment. And then that must influence the financial structure that's built. And so how do you account for those different types of impact, and how then, you know, then scale, if you could talk about that too?
So impact is at the core of everything we do in our design process, but we have a very important kind of pragmatic space around impact, which is we're not focused on capturing everything. So the resilience bonds are designed around one very key mechanism, and I won't call it an innovation because that always scares people off. So it's actually something that's very tried and true and has $24 billion of capital resting on it, which is catastrophe models. These are industry financial models that simulate the impacts of hurricanes, earthquakes, wildfires. I don't know how the people who build these things sleep at night. I live in San Diego, so what we do is we work with model outputs from these catastrophe models. We will look at Norfolk or Miami Beach, run the catastrophe models and say, okay, here are the damages from a hurricane, the expected exposure, the expected annual losses. And then we will say, okay, now run the models with the project in place. So now you have protection against the 200-year storm, and it's a simple subtraction. The model doesn't need to be debated. You are literally looking at a map of where water goes without the project and where water goes with the project, and subtracting the difference. So this is not high math. You don't need a quant for this. I'm an architect. And the impact piece of this is that subtraction. It is enormous in cases like San Francisco. The Port of San Francisco has a 6-mile seawall under the Embarcadero. Behind that seawall are $77 billion worth of assets. If you go to anyone in San Francisco, a property holder, the port, the city, and ask the question, if the big one hits and the seawall fails, is the earthquake at fault or is the port at fault? There's no good answer to that question. So part of what we're looking at in the impact piece is what's the biggest slice of the pie we can capture and create a whole bunch of co-benefits along the way. So if you do the seawalls in Miami Beach and Norfolk correctly, you're saving small business owners thousands of dollars in sandbags a year. Are we counting sandbags? Absolutely not. Could you do something else with that? For sure. We should do a benefit Miami or a benefit Norfolk based on the back of that. But it shouldn't be another thing that's jammed into these resilience bonds, because simplicity is the key to success for these instruments. So that, I think, transitions to the scale question, which is, I always find it fun in these spaces where we have plainly admitted that we're in the process of building the first one and we're already talking about how to get to the 100th or the $100 million. So please take this with the level of humility that we're coming at it with, which is we're excited to see these go. We're targeting $100 million issuances, which is the standard in the insurance industry for these catastrophe bonds. There are bonds that are as small as $5 million. $50 million is practical. But we're looking at, the reason I keep bringing up examples like seawalls is because we're looking at projects that merit that kind of investment and the resilience rebate that can come back to the project. I'll give you an example from Hoboken. We've done work with the city since 2013, after Sandy, on flood protection. And the city came to us and said, we want to do something, but we don't know what, which is most typically how we start projects, is we get a panicked phone call. And the city came to us with a great opportunity, which is, they said, we have 6 acres of industrial land, we don't know what to do with them. So we designed a project for them that is a layer cake of infrastructure that combined an underground parking garage with a stormwater capture system to combine sewer overflows and then flood the garage from the bottom up. So you basically create a 40 million gallon bathtub if you do this right. What that prevents is many of the things that matter in a lot of cities. So in Sandy, the sewer system exploded into the hospital. You can't really make up anything worse. So this kind of bathtub with green infrastructure and playing fields and open space on the top, a parking garage that generates revenue, and a stormwater capture system has a way of combining revenue-generating infrastructure with stuff that's normally just considered a public good. That project won't work for a resilience bond because it can't be modeled. You can measure hurricane surge, but the models aren't great at inland flooding, and they don't do underground well. So this is where, when it comes to scale, we're in a process now of really creating buckets of cities. Who can move on something big quickly in the next 2 to 3 years? Who has something interesting where we need to get the modeling industry to move faster and further? So we've pushed on the modeling firms to deal with that. And then who needs to be looking at some other kind of financing? So we're very clear about saying no, because there's a tremendous amount of romance in the public sector when it comes to private finance. I'm looking at Will for affirmation here. We get people all the time saying the insurers have a ton of money. And it's like, yes, they do. And it's safely in a collateral account, so it can pay out when you need it. You can't spend that. And so we find ourselves doing a lot of demystifying, and it's why I rarely speak with technical terms on either engineering or finance, and we use analogies like life insurance and smoking, because we need to bring everyone along if you're actually going to scale anything.
And so one thing I'm hearing clearly from you is don't let the perfect be the enemy of the good. Absolutely. Especially on the impact side. 60% capturing what matters. Let's go with that. I also feel like I heard that you designed these resiliency bonds very clearly with the idea of leveraging infrastructure, capital market tools, capital market structures that are already in place. Yes. That was really key. And you were thinking about that, one, because that enables scale, but I'm assuming also because that's going to enable investors to come in more easily, because it's something they recognize. It's something that looks like something else they know.
The holy grail for us is familiarity. If everyone can look at every piece of what we do and see themselves in some part of it, or see someone familiar in some part of it, that's the path to success. So the way the Hoboken project worked out was there's a garage in Rotterdam, there's a stormwater capture thing somewhere else in the US, there's a green infrastructure project in Philadelphia, and don't worry, we're just gluing it all together. The same thing is true for these resilience bonds. Catastrophe modeling is well understood. Catastrophe bonds are issued, they're in place. The only thing we are doing is using an existing reset mechanism to change the trigger. The trigger isn't changing in function, in form, none of the paperwork changes, the plumbing stays the same. You're just running the models twice and taking the difference between the numbers. The simplicity of it is what got us through the process and got us to the point where the industry was willing to validate it and say, yeah, we can go to market with these things, bring us projects. So now the challenge is getting that same standardization on the project side, because you come to a city like Miami Beach and they will call you and say they want green infrastructure. And that's adorable. They're trying to absorb the entire Atlantic Ocean. So they don't need street trees. They have 2 feet of water on a sunny day, on a high tide. So Some of it is also fixing the magical thinking on the project side for scale.
I hope this isn't magical thinking, Will.
No.
But, what is the potential of Benefit Chicago in Chicago? When you look out 5, 10 years, what would be exciting to be looking back upon?
I think there's a number of things. Given the current administration and its at least signal at what a potential budget would look like as they sort of work through that, the Benefit Chicago model is an excellent, I think, vehicle that still allows capital to really flow into these organizations. So, the timing, I don't know if it couldn't be better or more, it's more unfortunate that it's here, but either way, I think it's important that this allows an avenue for capital to really sort of flow in. Our research shows that over the next 5 to 6 years, there's a $400 million plus demand for this type of capital flowing in. As an example, we officially launched a website in July of last year. I came on board in August, and let's say we really got rolling in October. We've seen 80 plus applications nearing $200 million in requests in a very short period of time. So we know that the demand side is there. We're also seeing very strong signals from the investor side that tells us that this is something that the market is missing and needing. And so we feel pretty confident. I think, if we're talking 5, 10 years from now, that this impact investing becomes a normalized sort of conversation and topic like anyone else would think about a mutual fund or a stock purchase, those types of things, that it really sort of takes hold and heed. And then maybe this is a little selfish, but in fact, if there is a pressure from the community, if you're not investing socially, that tends to happen. This is what I'm referring to as sort of the social impact of impact investing, that people start to gather and think collectively about how they can invest. Or you haven't heard of Benefit Chicago. Well, let me explain to you what it is. That it sort of starts to get its own momentum within our communities to really become more of a self-fulfilling mechanism for investment. I think that's really what we're looking at. I think on the impact side, really bona fide sort of impact measurements being developed. Like you said, with definitions, there's a variety of definitions that plague a lot of our fields. On the impact side, it's also the same way, right? So I'm hearing stories of people explaining how Uber is an impact investment. When it started. It's delivering cars, it's saving the environment, it's doing this and that. And you have other sort of more traditional types of businesses that they're looking at. So the question is really, how do we sort of define our impact and can prove out our measurements? Because again, the individuals who are investing in Benefit Chicago may not be looking for the 15% return or beating the S&P 500, but in their minds, they have a combined return that they're looking for, that's made up of interest, some interest rate, their principal back, and some social return. And that mechanism and that addition needs to equal equivalent of what they could get somewhere else. And so we really want to make sure that we're able to sort of really understand and spell that out and really sort of preach the results that they're looking for that allows them to continue to reinvest and then bring other friends into the mix as well.
Yeah, well, one thing I see, because I'm out talking to investors, really engaging investors in investing in impact, is there seems to be at times a desire for investors to really be quite specific about where they want their money to go. I see, it's either an issue or a geography where they really want to target that money very clearly by impact or by geography, as I said. In Benefit Chicago, you're selling the city. You're selling this idea of a better city for all boats rise. Do you find investors are working against that philosophy and still trying to get that very customized impact at times when they're seeing the opportunity to invest in Chicago? So instead of saying, yeah, I'll buy that note, that investment in Benefit Chicago, the investment in the city, rather than saying that, they're saying, I'd rather have that building in this part of the city.
We do see that quite a bit. And again, with our partnership with the Chicago Community Trust, in working with their donors and trustees on investing in Benefit Chicago, either directly in purchasing the notes or through a donor-advised fund through the trust, what you find is those individuals, particularly on the higher end of the investments, where they have accumulated some wealth over a number of years, they have, over that time, really have determined what their area of focus should be, right? They have given it some thought. They have created either a donor-advised fund or some family foundation, and they have taken on a cause. We are concerned about education. We are concerned about health care. We are concerned about recidivism within the justice system. And it is a challenge in sort of getting to understand why they should invest in this general sort of pool, again, sort of voting for Chicago. But this is really in sort of the benefit proposition that we're proposing, right? One, a lot of the work that they do sometimes is philanthropic, and it's through grants. This is a way actually to extend the types of benefits that they're giving. They can make a 1, 3, 4, 5-year investment in Benefit Chicago, get the return, and still do their other sort of gifts and things that they're trying to do philanthropically. And so this is, to me, really a way that we try to show them on how we sort of try to fix the dysfunctions within the economic financial system and structure that exist here. We're not saying that grants and these other philanthropic things aren't needed, but it's where Benefit Chicago can plug in the dysfunctions and really create opportunity for these organizations, businesses, and social enterprises to thrive going forward. So it really is around how their desire to help is seen within the portfolio. We're agnostic to sort of the social impact, so we're not sort of focused in on an area. But we also ask them if they have an organization or they're seeing some activity that they're interested in, to have them come into us. So it's both a way for them to give us organizations to look at and consider, but them to also help the city in general.
Really helpful to hear, because actually what I find very interesting about what you shared is part of what Benefit Chicago is doing is filling the holes by sometimes the selection of very specific either philanthropy or investment options individuals make. It creates almost an unbalanced community. And to really fill in the gaps, kind of the Swiss cheese that's there, having this unrestricted, this pool of funds that's looking for the benefit of the community is incredibly important. Not to mention, knowing the plumbing, it makes the economics work for the fund when there isn't the need to customize. So this is just going into my last question before we open it up to the audience. For both of you, and maybe Will, you already covered this, but it's a room of investors.
Yeah.
Yeah, okay. So what can they do to support the opportunities that you both presented?
Well, we've had a surprising set of investor conversations since putting out this resilience bond model in December 2015. And the one that surprised me most was a set of pension funds that reached out shortly after the report was released and said, "We own ports. How can we get them to protect themselves?" So I think investors have an incredibly important role to play in understanding what the real assets are under your holdings and knowing where those risks are and who can do the loss mitigation. Insurers do this at the retail level, right? That's why we have fire codes, because insurance companies were going out of business because they weren't able to protect their assets. I think investors in this space can play a very powerful role in getting insurers to think differently and mobilize capital for public sector risk reduction. And that's meaningful in a lot of ways. The Hoboken example I gave could be a social impact bond for elderly people who were flooded out of their homes or trapped for 2 weeks in Sandy. We just came at it from a different direction. I think, Will, you and I are kind of different parts of the same Russian doll. And ideally, we will create the kinds of benefits that you are starting with at the end of the day. And the benefits that you are measuring will help us design better resilience bonds and push the modeling to capture new benefits. So my ask to all of you who are managing money is to look at what your holdings are and figure out what's at risk and call us if you're not sure, because we would love to have the conversation with you. And we were shocked to learn, that pension funds were majority holders of ports that have no insurance. And I suspect you might be too.
I think from my perspective, it's really straightforward. I think we have an opportunity here, and we're about to be in what I believe is one of the largest wealth transfers in American history. I think there's some $60 trillion that's going to transfer in the coming years. And the majority of this will be controlled by 1 woman and 2 millennials, as the data sort of shows. And so what we're looking at really is how do we work with these groups, which happen to also be the groups that are most interested in impact investing. And so we have a real opportunity, I think, to sort of understand what the market is and start to talk with our clients, with our firms, about how do we get into this space. I think what we'll continue to see is a continued decline in federal and city sort of investments, particularly as the masses start to move into these centralized locations. This is a phenomenal time. With more people in the same place, we get efficiencies, we get all these other benefits, but those also come with detriments. Poverty, crime, those things sort of come as we bring people more and more together. And I think through impact investing, particularly in Benefit Chicago as it relates to Chicago, there is a prime opportunity to allow the brilliance, the creativity, and entrepreneurship that thrives throughout the entire city to really reach its vision and its full potential. And so I'd ask that you can go to the website, you can talk to me after this, but really start to consider how can you get involved. Again, with the flexibility we have, you can get involved at small amounts or larger, but I think just the notion of getting involved truly is important. And there's a quote that says, truly wicked is the witch that stands for nothing. Right? Truly wicked is the witch that stands for nothing. And I'm saying today we have to stand for something and be about helping to change community, helping to thrive these neighborhoods, and helping to move our society forward is an important task that I hope you'd stand along with me.